At this point, I'm going to introduce Phil Zuckerman. Phil, one of my favorite people in life, Professor of Secular Studies, Pitzer College, and he's the Executive Director of Humanist Global Charity. The author of several books, including What It Means to Be Moral, The Nonreligious, Living the Secular Life, on What It Means to Be Humanist, Society Without God, and the editor of several volumes, including the Oxford Handbook of Secularism and the Social Theory of W.E.B. Du Bois. He is an associate dean as well, a professor of sociology at Pitzer College, and the founding chair of the nation's first secular studies program. He lives in Claremont, California with his wife and kids. Welcome, Phil.
Well, good morning. Yeah. So not being a historian, I saw that the theme was, past and future, or past, present, and future. And I was like, shit. I read books on the history of secularism and humanism and free thought, but I'm certainly no expert. But as a sociologist, I tend to study contemporary society more. I'm working on a book right now on secularization. So I thought I would talk today a little bit about just what I see as some of the big points of not contention, but the things I worry about. How about that? The things that I'm struggling with, the good, the bad, but where I see some of the things that we are having to really contend with.
Sounds
Got my
good.
corn cob pipe here. So that always makes me feel a little bit more brilliant. It's got a hole in the bottom though, so it doesn't really work. But okay, so the big headline news, of course, is growth, right? The number of people who are walking away from religion, disengaging from religion, is historically unprecedented. That much I can say with a high degree of confidence. We have, for the first time in recorded history, societies now where the majority are non-religious. Places like Scotland, Estonia, Czech Republic, the Netherlands, Japan, South Korea, where a majority of people are not believers, behaviors, or belongers. They don't believe in supernatural religious claims. They don't belong to religious organizations, and they don't do much in the way of religious activities, rites, or rituals. So that actually this is historically unprecedented. And then, in addition to this handful of nations where there's now a majority secular, we also have huge explosion of secular populations in other societies, places like Uruguay, Chile. The numbers are exploding. Here in the United States, right? I'm 52, I think. When I was born in 1969, only about 4% of Americans said they had no religion. And today that's somewhere between 25 and 30% saying they have no religion. Now that is a measure of religious affiliation. So that all that means is that they don't affiliate with a religion. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're atheists, agnostics, or humanists. Many people who don't affiliate with a religion maintain personal religious orientations to the world. But conversely, many people who maintain religious affiliations maintain an atheistic or secular or humanist worldview. I was just at lunch yesterday with two colleagues who explained that, yes, they were both Latinx folks, both from Mexican-American backgrounds, and they explained that it was really important to go to church because their grandma wanted them to do that. So they grew up going to church, but they never believed. Yes, there's some Catholic iconography in their home, but they're effectively secular. They don't believe, they don't really even know the teachings of the Catholic Church per se. And so there's a lot of people who are religiously affiliated, but don't believe. So you've got these different ways of measuring these things, different degrees of religiosity and secularity. But at the end of the day, right now, we're just seeing such a huge growth of people who are not affiliated. Religious rituals and behaviors are plummeting. More and more people are getting married outside of religious auspices. More and more people are foregoing Sunday schools and Bible schools. More and more people are foregoing baptism for their children. More and more people are having secular funerals. The secular funeral industry is exploding. So we're just seeing a rise of secularity, which is really exciting. It's a good time to be secular and a good time to be in the secular business as more and more people disaffiliate, disassociate. And however, despite that growth of secularity, secularists, folks like us who right now on a Saturday morning are staring at our computers, talking to each other, we are, I think, relatively small compared to our numbers. So let's just stick with the US, or we could say North America, US and Canada. Canada secularity rates are higher than in the US. So I like to differentiate between secular people and secularists. Secular people are just folks that have walked away from religion and they're just living their lives. They're playing soccer, they're going hunting, they're engaged in politics, or they like to watch movies, or whatever it is. Think of the Brady Bunch. If you ever watched that fantastic show from the early 70s, obviously the producers of the Brady Bunch wanted to make a mainstream show that would appeal to lots of Americans so they could sell commercials. So of course they had to make the family white, because back in the early 70s you couldn't feature well, I guess you could, but you wanted to feature a family that there were so many white people that was going to be the biggest market. And you didn't want to make them explicitly ethnic. They couldn't be explicitly Cuban or Jewish or Italian or Irish, right? That would limit your market. Couldn't be a racial minority. That would limit your market. So they had to be white, bland, and benign. And you couldn't insert religion in the Brady Bunch because that would alienate your audience. So you just made them religionless. So the Brady Bunch, I watched every episode about 50 zillion times. There's no religion. You never see anybody pray. You never see anybody mention the Bible. You never see anybody mention God, Jesus, Muhammad, Allah, nothing. And yet it's just a secular family by default, meaning they're living their lives quite nicely. They're auditioning for the cheerleading tryouts, and they're playing football, and they're going surfing and going to Hawaii and going to the Grand Canyon, but they're not actively humanist or secularist. And that is folks like us who are actively concerned with, engaged in, and motivated by our secularity. So we want to know, it's a big part of our identity, I think, as Dave said in the introduction, as to who's welcome here or who's attending here today. All are welcome. And so my question is, what keeps me up at night is, our numbers in terms of the secular by default are exploding like never before. But our activist base, I think, is also growing, but it's relatively small. And so the question is why? And maybe that's something that can be discussed today. Why is it that so many of my students, for example, in Claremont, who are secular, would have no interest in secular causes or joining a secular group? Why is it that most of the guys I play soccer with are secular by default, but have no interest? In fact, they find it sort of curious that I'm so involved in secular activism. So is this a marketing issue? Is there something else going on? Something to talk about. So that's the growth issue. On the one hand, good news. More and more people are walking away from religion than ever before. On the other hand, our numbers of secularist base is still, even though it is also growing, it's small, I think, compared to what it could be. And especially compared to religious activist folks, right? There's so many venues in political, charitable, or just social that religious people get involved in. Are we just not joiners by nature? There's some literature on that. Next, of course, I think the big issue which unites contemporary secularists with our forebears, at least 100 years ago, is that the good old separation of church and state, First Amendment. Good news, we have a very strong and wonderful contingent now of excellent lawyers who are affiliated with the American Humanist Association, Freedom from Religion Foundation, and so many others who are actively fighting the good fight. In fact, Monica Miller, a proud alum of Pitzer College, I might add, argued her case in front of the Supreme Court. We are getting into circuit courts, appellate courts, Supreme Courts. We lost that case, but we shouldn't have. And the only reason we lost it is because we have Christian fundamentalist nationalists on our courts. And I'll get to that. So the good news is that we have more active and engaged legal teams across the country fighting to protect the separation of church and state. We have a free thought caucus. Last time I checked, I think it had only about 15 members, but there's some really prominent members and people of color and women. When you look at that free thought caucus, I often say it bums me out when secularist gatherings are more white than a Trump rally, but the fact is there's actually more people of color at Trump rallies sometimes than at our gatherings. But if you look at that free thought caucus, it's more of a broad mirror of the diversity, ethnic and racial and cultural diversity in the United States. So I'm proud of that. And we have more out non-religious politicians than ever before. In fact, I believe one or two just won in the recent elections a week or two ago. So that's some good news. Also, the final good news is I think Trump may have done more to inspire secular activism than a lot of folks from the last 100 years. When Donald Trump was president and when he embraced the white Christians so heartily, and when he held up that, I believe, that Bible upside down in front of that church in DC, he just created about 10 million new, young, secular, sympathetic folks who do not want to see a president embracing religiosity so explicitly for such cynical ends. So even though Trump was, I think, a heinous blight on our nation, and we will be suffering the reverberations of that for years to come, and he may be plotting a military uprising as I speak. I see his supporters driving in their semi-automatic and their pickup trucks with their weapons up and down Foothill Boulevard, so I don't know what's yet to come. But that said, he turned a lot of folks off of religion, and he emphasized, I think, for the world, for the American public, how important to keep that wall of separation is. The bad news is he appointed so many judges at so many levels, right? At state courts, county courts, appellate, circuit, and supreme. And that is going to make our cause, the separation of church and state, we're on the losing side right now, big time. And we have our work cut out for us. And I expect us to lose every First Amendment church separation case that comes before these courts for the next 20 years. And that's really, our children are going to suffer. Our public schools are going to suffer. Our infrastructure is going to suffer. Our healthcare is going to suffer for that. Women's rights, women's reproductive rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of good, but there's a lot of stuff that we need to be fighting against and struggling for. So that leads to another issue, and that is something I struggle with. How is and why is secularism, atheism, humanism related to such a clear progressive political orientation? And survey after survey after survey shows that we are among the most left-leaning. Yes, there are some right-wing atheists. Ayn Rand, right? Ayn Rand and Karl Marx didn't agree on much, but they certainly held hands on holding up the atheist goblet. That's kind of interesting, right? David Silverman, may his name be blotted from the annals of history, who is a recent past president of American Atheists, is a Trump-loving, climate change denying, abortion rights denying, racism denying. By racism denying, I mean denying the perniciousness of racism. I don't mean he's not racist. He's quite racist. Anyway, sorry, David, but you've just broken my heart. And I think you've really swallowed some poison in your bitterness. Anyway, no personal rants here. No one wants to hear two Jews getting at each other's throats. Okay, or maybe you do. That's kind of fun. Anyway, so David Silverman is an atheist, an outspoken atheist, and yet has embraced Trump. So if you think about it, just saying, someone who had Michael's experience as a young person who said, I don't believe this doesn't make sense, none of this adds up, none of that lends itself towards any explicit political orientation. One can simply say, I don't see evidence for a God, and then what? And, then what are my politics? What's my position on taxes? What's my position on cloning? What's my position on firearms? Et cetera, et cetera. Karl Marx, strong atheist, was very clear that people should be armed. In fact, he wrote again and again and again that unless every citizen has a gun, there will be no freedom. That's Karl Marx. That's not Donald Trump. That's not David Silverman. So just because you don't believe in God, it's a non sequitur to say, and you should have these political views. And yet we do. Overwhelmingly, we are more likely to understand the climate crisis and want to stop it. We are more likely to understand why women should have autonomy over their bodies and want to support it and defend it. We are more likely to understand the damage that semi-automatic weapons can do and want to limit their, have humane, sane gun policies. We are more likely to understand the evils of racism and to, it's not to say that we don't have our own internalized racisms, but we always, on every survey, are far more likely to support policies that seek to ameliorate racist results. We are less racist in our attitudes than religious folks. We are less homophobic. We are more supportive of women's rights, trans rights, animal rights even, right? So there's clearly something going on here. Why? How does this work? And what does it mean for a secular movement if we are politically dominant in one direction? Now, maybe that's a good thing. It certainly works for me. I'm I loved Bernie, but I was also happy with Biden, and I'm a secular humanist. I feel very comfortable at most secular humanist gatherings. But the thing that really brought this to the fore, and I'll end this little section here, is during the last major national elections, there was an election in the South. I think it was Georgia. And there was an important, crucial Senate seat open. And this was so crucial because if the Democrats got, 50% or more, we could pass a lot more legislation to save planet Earth, to save women's rights, et cetera, et cetera. And so this was the South, and you may remember it was between a Republican, I forget the person's name, and there was an African American, I think it was Warnock, who was the Democratic progressive voice. Warnock is a pastor, is a priest, is a man of God, like Martin Luther King Jr. was, is a strong believer in the gospel, in the Bible, in Jesus' resurrection, in the powerful blood of Jesus. I was so rooting for him, right? And it didn't matter to me that he was not an atheist, a humanist, or a secularist. I believed in his progressive politics. And thank goodness, thank the good people of Georgia that he won that election. But what that says to me is it makes me struggle with what is really stronger here, my politics or my secularity? To me, they seem united. But as we try to grow our secular movement, we have to ask ourselves who is and who is not welcome politically, and what are the reverberations of that? And we're seeing some of this right now online. I know I said I was going to end here, but if you follow certain websites, certain blogs, I see a little bit of infighting going on between the old guard, the sort of male, white, dominant folks who were the new atheists, who are taking certain positions on things like transgenderism. And I'm seeing younger folks who are calling them out. And part of me feels like, hey, it's good to have these internal struggles. It means we're growing. It means we're getting more diverse. A movement should have its internal struggles, right? That means we're expanding. On the other hand, we're still such a minority in this country in terms of our rights, in terms of our, we're still such a small speck of activism. And we need government to take us seriously. We need senators to take us seriously the same way they take the religious right seriously. We need legislators to think, can I sign this bill? What will secular America think if I do this? The same way they think, what will the Christian right think if I sign this? And so that infighting is something I'm worried about, even though I see it's natural and inevitable. Which leads to my next issue. How diverse are we really? This wonderful book, if you've ever read Village Atheists, wonderful book about early 1800s atheism in America. And they too struggled with issues of race, exclusion, inclusion. So I would like to see our secular movement more racially diverse, genderly diverse, sexually diverse. I think we need to do that. There's no question about it. And that's not something, I think it was Michael saying earlier, we can't just sit back and let secular humanism happen. We have to make it happen. I think the same thing applies to getting more diversity in our ranks. It's not just going to happen by default. It's not like suddenly people of color are going to feel welcome and walk in and take leadership positions. No, they're going to actually look at who we are and think, maybe I'm not really welcome here. So we have to take active steps to reach out, to listen, to be open to criticism. It's sometimes uncomfortable, but that's what it means to be human. And we have to grow that way. So I'm excited to see it happening more and more. I'm going to be at FFRF next week in Boston. I'm happy to see a greater diversity of speakers and leaders. So thanks for listening to my rant. Love you all. Stay strong in the struggle. Eat an apple, have some coffee, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks so much, Phil. That is so inspiring. And that's really one of the main purposes of our getting together today, to try to get people a feeling of how can we get more engaged? How can we all become more involved in all the many aspects of this movement, which you so well pointed out is different. It's different than it is for many religious focused folks. It's so spread. Thank you so much. That was fantastic.